guys, it's Ty with Ty the Dog Guy on the Daily, and I want to talk today about context. So, what I mean by that is context and how your dog perceives information, perceives. So what I mean by that is we do, for example, at our company, we do a lot of what we call boot camps. So boot camp is where either local people or we even get a lot of people from out of state will send us their dog and we train the dog and then the dog goes home. And so years ago when I started doing boot camps, I understood context, but I didn't understand it deeply enough to understand that I needed to explain it to everyone. Obviously, that was a rookie mistake when I was younger doing this. But what would happen would be, I would, train this dog, and I'd bring it back to their house, and I'd say, okay, here's how you get it to be obedient. And if he's not obedient, you got to do this, and you got to make sure you're doing, and they would be like, whoa, 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 whoa. I thought it was just, all I do is say sit, all I do is say come, and the dog does it. And I was like, well, no, the dog's not a machine. He understands these things well. I've trained him to do these things well, but just because he understands these things doesn't mean he's just going to do it for you immediately out of the gate without any sort of practice. And I remember, I think it was the first or the second boot camp that I did, I ticked off the owner. This was probably 9 or 10 years ago. But I remember, I trained the dog for the daughter. The daughter was in her 20s. I bring the dog back and I'm showing her how to do all this stuff. And then the dad calls me probably the next day. She lived at home with dad. Next day or the day after and says, what the heck is going on? The dog's not listening to me. And I was like, well, sir, you weren't there for the go home session. I need to show you how to do things. He's like, what do you mean you need to show me how to do things? The dog's supposed to be trained. He's supposed to listen. And I realized right then that I had screwed up. Now, I don't think I'd screwed up in the training. The dog was well trained. But what I had screwed up in is not explaining to the owners about context. Here's the thing. If you give me a TV remote, I can change the channel by hitting a button. You can give that remote to any person on earth, and if they hit that same button, it will change the channel. That's a machine. That's a machine that can, that has no motives, no agenda, no feelings, no emotions. And so a lot of people think that dogs are the same. Oh, just go ahead and get him trained, and he'll come back perfect, right? Well, it doesn't work that way when we're talking about a living, breathing creature. Just because the dog is trained in one context doesn't mean it's trained in another. Let me give you another example. We get people all the time who call us. They're furious, not at us, but they're furious because they said, I adopted this dog from the shelter, or I got this dog, I found him in the classifieds, and the people swore to us that the dog was house trained. I brought him home, and he's peeing in the house, and he's chewing stuff up. He is not house trained. And I'll often, tell them, almost as if I'm sticking up for the last person, and I'm not, but, almost as if I am. I'll say maybe the dog was house trained, but he was house trained at their house, with their schedule, knowing where their back door was, knowing what was expected of them. Just because the dog was house trained in this context doesn't mean he's going to be house trained in your context. And so every dog can have a foundation of anything, whether it's house training, obedience training, protection training, agility training. But just because you hand that leash to the next person doesn't mean that the dog will automatically recognize that context, that sit is put your butt on the ground, that down is put your elbows on the ground, that this is this and that is that. The dog must understand how to work through that context. And so every day this is what we do when we've got dogs going home from our boot camp. And nowadays we're much better. So before we ever sell a boot camp to anybody, we're very clear to them, like, hey, listen, the dog is going to go home well trained, but he's going to test you. He's going to try to figure out a way to get around the rules. He's going to try to figure out, this and that and the other, and how to not be obedient, because dogs are like water, like people. You know, like water, you know, we seek the path of least resistance, right? And the dog wants to do the same thing. We want to do the same thing in the sense that we sometimes want to do it the easiest way, and the easiest way is just giving into our impulses and jumping on people when we feel like jumping and chewing stuff when we feel like chewing. So anyways, nowadays we're very good at helping people understand that, yes, the dog's going to come home trained. But now we got to get you guys trained so that you can understand how to drive this, how to manage this. In fact, there's this example that I often use. Years and years ago, this has been 10, 11 years ago, had this client in the south of Spain, awesome people, and they had a Ferrari. Now, I think cars are cool. I've never been a car guy, but, you know, I'm impressed by this Ferrari. And every night going out to dinner with these clients, they're like, why don't you take the Ferrari? And I'm like, no. I don't want to take this $300,000 car and potentially ruin it. And no, go ahead. And finally, the last night I relented. Isn't that stupid? You know, they had to twist my arm to get me to drive a Ferrari. And I'd driven 100 cars at this point. You know, I had tons of cars. But this was different. You know, this was the way you shifted was on the steering wheel, and you touched the gas and you'd be going 100 miles an hour basically already. And the ignition was different. Like, everything was different. And so while I had cars and driven tons of cars, this was a way different story because the context had changed and how the car was put together had changed. And so just because I knew how to drive a car didn't mean I was going to drive a Ferrari very well. And so I tell people when their dogs are going home from boot camp, I was able to drive the Ferrari. In fact, I got it up going over 100 miles an hour down these winding Spanish roads. It was pretty awesome. You know, I was able to get the car to go, but I didn't access everything that car had. No way. I didn't access everything that they could access just because I didn't have the repetitions. And that's what I try to get across to our clients, is that the dog's going to go home. You're not going to access everything right away. Just because I can off-leash heel with your dog through a crowd of distractions doesn't mean that you can do that right away. We've got to get you up to speed, even though your dog's already up to speed. But I try to encourage my clients to think a lot about that in terms of everything. You know, they say my dog's obedient unless, you know, we go out to the park and there's distractions. Context changed. My dog's obedient unless we have friends over. Context changed. My dog's obedient for me, but not for my wife. Context changed. My dog's, you know, when the context changes, that doesn't mean the dog's immediately going to understand everything. And so that's where a big part of the training process is getting repetitions, as many repetitions as possible, around as many types of things as possible. And in doing so, it becomes so much less about context. And now the dog is able to perform and have that great obedience just about anywhere we go, and not just in context, you know, not just in context A, B, C, but also in context D, E, F, G, H, A, J, K, however that alphabet goes. So, makes sense? Hopefully. So, think about that in terms of your dog. What types of contextual things need to change in order for your dog to understand the things he understands in one place and understand them everywhere?